Well, good morning, and thank you everyone for joining our webinar today on Solar for the Middle, a practical conversation about going solar for mid-sized companies. My name is Darius Razgadis. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Safari Energy. We're going to be discussing a topic that we've covered in a white paper that's available on this page, safarienergy.com/middle. In the white paper, we explore the various pressures that mid-scale companies are facing today, and we look at how solar power can be a solution for them. Safari Energy, for those of you who might not be familiar, is a commercial and industrial solar developer owned by PPL Corporation, a leading Fortune 500 energy company. We've developed hundreds of solar projects of all types across the country, from Massachusetts to Hawaii, handling all elements of the process. So without further ado, please let me introduce Kirk Edelman, Safari Energy's Chief Commercial Officer, and Ron Wedeking, our Senior Vice President of Business Development. We'll start with you, Kirk. Why are we looking at middle market companies?
Great question, Darius. There are really two main reasons. One, when you think of sustainability programs, you typically think about Fortune 500 companies, but all of those companies have supply chains, and these supply chains are typically made up of middle market companies. A recent study showed that a supply chain produces more than 5.5 times the carbon emissions that produced by the Fortune 500 company that it supplies. So it's an area that I think is ripe for us to come in and lend a hand. There's also an additional reason. One, it's an untapped market. A recent study showed that there was approximately 600,000 commercial structures in the United States that could benefit from solar. And we want to help them save on electricity, as well as benefit from tax and reputational incentives that are available in the market today. So bottom line is we're going to help them reduce their power costs as well as their carbon footprint.
So it sounds like there's a large untapped market here, and plenty of benefits to be had. Ron, maybe you could get into some more of the information on those benefits that Kirk was just mentioning.
Glad to do it, Darius, and thanks for having me this morning. There are a lot of reasons that mid-market companies choose to go solar, and some see it as a bonus and others see it as really central to their mission of serving upstream to the vendors that they serve. As Kirk mentioned, there's a lot of downward momentum on ESG now being pressed down into the supply chain. And for those companies, they have their primary drivers are really economics, in addition to the responsibility to the upwards in the chain. Number one is, can the system reduce my bills? Is this going to have an impact on my electric bills on a monthly basis? Secondly, how much of a tax benefit can I get if I own the system? And the value of these benefits can vary greatly depending on a company's tax liabilities, credit rating, electric rates, location, energy usage, and available incentives. But we're also seeing increasing mid-scale companies that form part of a supply chain looking to appeal more to the procurement teams and the corporate buyers that are putting a premium on sustainability. And that's their primary source of income as a company, and they're paying attention to it.
That, you've convinced me. Those benefits sound pretty good, but I guess a topic that we've talked about before, Ron, is the risks of going solar. Why it might seem a little counterintuitive for the head of business development to talk about the risks of going solar or why not to go solar, but perhaps you could, just give us a straight shooting. Why would somebody hesitate about going solar, especially in the middle market?
Yeah, there are a couple of different reasons why there's some hesitation. First of all, if they're looking at owning a system, it takes capital. And they may not have free CapEx to buy a system, put it on their roof. It could be $1 million to $2 million of capital expenditures. The second reason is they may not have the what we call a tax appetite, or the tax burden that a company has, that the ITC, the investment tax credit with a solar project, helps to offset. And there are some other factors to consider. If they lease their space, they really have to get the landlord's involvement in that as well. Their energy usage could be too low to really justify an investment in a solar project. And then there's also the aesthetics. Some people don't want solar panels to be physically visible from the front of the building. But that's all, those are all questions that we help a company navigate as they go through wondering whether or not solar makes sense for them.
You mentioned ITC, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But on another kind of alphabet soup that the solar industry is known for is ESG, which mentioned a little bit earlier, environmental, social, and governance goals that a lot of companies have. Kirk, maybe you can explain a little bit more about why these middle market companies that are part of a supply chain should care about ESG goals.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk in the market right now about ESG, and a lot of larger companies in particular, those that are publicly traded, are under a lot of pressure to show that they're responding to these ESG concerns. As I mentioned earlier, that concern isn't only limited to these large Fortune 500 companies, but now it's sort of going downstream and starting to impact middle market companies. A lot of people look at ESG, and as you mentioned, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. But some people simply believe it's shorthand for sustainability initiatives. And that's becoming increasingly important these days. Now, even though Fortune 500 companies are no strangers to ESG, the middle market companies that make up the supply chain to those Fortune 500 companies are maybe not as sophisticated, don't have the resources, as I mentioned earlier, but they're increasingly becoming the targets. So where does solar fit in? Basically, solar is can respond to the E in ESG. And it's really a win-win situation compared to a lot of other solutions that companies might consider for ESG. Solar is very cost effective. It's not terribly difficult to implement. You don't have to change the behavior of your company to make it work. And relatively speaking, it's an immediate response. It provides tangible impacts right away. You can reduce your power costs and you can reduce your carbon footprint. So you save money and you become more green. And that is really the E in ESG.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty convincing case probably to most people who would be listening to this webinar. I wonder, Ron, if I was somebody who was ready to go solar, what would be the first step? Where should I start?
The first step would be to reach out to us, either through email or a phone call, or dropping us a note on our website, and we get right back to you. From there, we start by taking a look at the roof or the available areas around the buildings. We look for ideal candidates, which are large, flat, unencumbered roofs. And then we also look at the utility bills that a company has to understand your usage and your rates so that we can design the best system possible to satisfy those needs. And lastly, we look at the available incentives and whether or not you can take advantage of those incentives. And if you can, and if you want to purchase the system, we certainly price it out to own yourself. And we also make available the opportunity to have a power purchase agreement where we own the system and it doesn't cost you anything. So it could be one or the other. There are lots of ways that we can make a system fit for an individual business.
Yeah, you mentioned power purchase agreements, Ron. Another alphabet soup, PPA in this business. Maybe you can get into that a little bit more, because you also mentioned earlier how one of the drawbacks is that for a lot of companies is that they might not be able to afford the capital expenditure up front. A PPA is a nice way to work around that challenge sometimes.
Yeah, it really is, because there are really two ways to go about ownership of a system. Either the business can own it and take advantages of all of the incentives and all of the benefit of having essentially free power when that system is paid off. Or with no CapEx, they can have a system that lowers their monthly bills substantially in many cases, and get the advantage of having lower electric bills and satisfying ESG requirements from their vendors, and not having any CapEx, capital expenditures to put out for it.
So Ron, another follow-up question on PPAs. If I, depending on my electricity rate, a PPA might be more attractive than, a lower electricity rate. What kind of factors are you looking for to set up a really good deal for our clients?
Yeah, certainly the electricity rates are a major contributor as to whether or not a PPA makes sense for a company. We try and lower the energy bills by at least 10 to 20%. So it makes sense for a company to adopt solar and have it on their roof. That said, there are some incentives in some states, Connecticut, Massachusetts, California, with some of the incentives across the nation that in addition to the energy rates they pay, help lower that so we get under that threshold that we're looking for. One of the things that we do right off the bat is to look at the energy bills, making an analysis of the energy bills, and get right back to the customer to tell them whether or not we think that it'll work or not. In many ways, getting to know is one of the most important things so that we're not wasting the company's time or anybody else's.
And not to pick on you too much, Ron, but just a follow-up question on that as well. The time that it takes to figure this out. I mean, how quickly should a solar developer be able to turn around some initial figures for a solar project?
That's a great question, Darius. So indicative pricing takes about a week to 2 weeks if we're analyzing energy bills and things like that. If we get into a detailed analysis and design, that can take upwards of 4 weeks to get back from engineering, design, our cost estimating, and then our pricing process.
Great, thanks so much. I guess one of the factors that might take a little bit longer to factor in on a solar project would be the incentives that are available. Kirk, I was hoping perhaps you could enlighten us a little bit about what we mentioned earlier, ITC, the investment tax credit that Ron mentioned. RPS goals are another area that we often talk about. That's the renewable portfolio standards that states set. Can you give us an idea a little bit more about how middle market companies can benefit from these particular incentives?
Yeah, it can get complicated, Darius, because there's a lot of incentive programs out there that are provided at various levels of the government to promote the development of green energy. So you have incentives at the federal level, at the state level, and even at the local government levels. And so it's very important when you're considering solar that you know what's available out there to help make the investment perhaps even more attractive. So starting at the top, at the federal level, you basically get two types of incentives. One is they give you an investment tax credit, which is a percentage of the cost of the project that you get just as the acronym suggests, a tax credit. Another one is that they allow you to accelerate depreciation on the assets that you're installing. So those are two incentives that become very powerful because it can really make the economics of the project a lot more attractive. When you go down to the next level, at the state level, there's a lot going on there, and every state is different. Many states have instituted, as you suggested, RPSs, Renewable Portfolio Standards. And basically what they're doing is they're saying, hey, if you're going to generate electricity in my state, you have to have an increasing percentage of that electricity be from renewable sources. So these renewable portfolio standards are putting a lot of pressure on at the state level to drive clean energy development. In turn, what happens is that each state looks at it and tries to figure out, in their opinion, which is the most attractive way to incentivize an increased level of green energy being developed. So that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. One way is they might allow net metering, where basically you can put a solar project on your property, and whatever you don't use yourself, you can basically sell it back to the local utility at the price you pay for power from that utility. So that can be a very attractive alternative. Another incentive that they allow at the state level, and it varies by state, are renewable energy credits. These RECs are things that you earn for generating megawatt hours of green energy, and they can be extremely attractive and make a difference on a project. Sometimes they take the form of a fixed price REC. Sometimes they're actively traded in a secondary market, so the value fluctuates. But it sounds complicated. It can be a little bit complicated, but making sure that you take advantage of these incentives is absolutely critical. at the lowest level, even the local level, there's a lot of programs you see at the local level where they're trying to promote green energy being developed in the municipality or in a region of a state. And they'll provide certain incentives to make that happen or to make it look more attractive. So basically, you have to understand what's out there. And that's where having a good solar partner can make all the difference in the world. What else? I think it's important to understand the ownership structure of the project. As Ron just alluded to a moment ago, you can own the project yourself. A lot of times you can support the development of the project for your benefit, but not own it yourself. Why would you want to consider that? Well, a lot of times it might be more efficient for someone else to own it, and that can make the project even more attractive for you, the person who's going to be using the green energy. I think bottom line, Darius, if you are a large energy user and if you're paying taxes, there's probably a lot of things you want to look at and consider when you're talking about potentially supporting renewable energy. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's important that you have a really strong renewable energy partner. And that's a role that a company like Safari Energy can play for you.
Yeah, it does, like you mentioned, it does sound like it can get pretty complicated. So that would be pretty important to make sure it's you're working with someone you trust to find all the right benefits and juggle them in such a way that it overcomes any challenges or hurdles you might have as a company. And I guess it comes down to either you own it and you benefit from the electricity being produced on your roof and the incentives available, or a company like Safari or a third party would own the solar system and you benefit from discounted power essentially. So Ron, I guess speaking of navigating all of this, I think we would probably prefer anybody who's listening to this webinar to work directly with Safari Energy and not look around or shop around out there. But obviously, everybody's going to want to do some due diligence and understand what's available out there. What sort of things should a middle market company be looking for when they're looking for a solar partner?
That's a great question, Darius. And one of the mistakes that I think a lot of companies make is they only think about price when there are so many other things, as Kirk just mentioned, to think about in making a decision about putting solar on your roof or taking advantage of green energy. One of the first things is to think about is this company going to be there to finish the job? We've seen time and time again in our industry, unfortunately, people that win work don't finish it because they don't have the capital themselves to finish a project. And the owners of these companies get stranded with things on their roof that don't work. Secondly, is the company that you're bringing in, do they have the wherewithal to have safe harbored panels? And the third area is actually, are they big enough to afford bonding? Would they provide a bond to make sure that they finish the project in a way that is satisfactory on your roof? And I'm very, very pleased that we're the type of company that can drive that value to the middle market. We can be their energy partner, as Kirk said, and really work with them to evaluate and come up with the best solution for them. Now, if they're going to go out and get a professional consultant to come in, they can pay for that. There are many good consultants out there that can help guide them through that. But one of the advantages of using a company like Safari is that we do that for no cost. And if we get to a no, we happily tell that person that they're probably better off not putting it on their roof. If we get to a yes, we're completely capable of fulfilling that for them. And we have many happy customers that can attest to that.
Okay, Ron, that's interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about Safe Harbor and how that can play into a middle market company's strategy for their solar project?
You bet. In addition to the incentives that Kirk just mentioned, Safe Harbor is basically a program that's been established by the federal government to incent solar energy. And in 2019, it was set at 30%. It declined last year to 26%. And this year, in 2021, it will go to 22%. And then finally down to 10% of an investment tax credit. And that covers, it's a credit that applies to the entire project. And by taken advantage of safe harbor panels, and somebody like Safari that has safe harbor panels, a customer may be able to take advantage of those full incentives that safe harbor panels offer.
Kirk, I have another question for you about finding a solar partner. I know that we've been talking about looking directly. Ron mentioned working with a consultant. We've talked in the past about RFPs, requests for proposals. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how those work and whether that's a good fit for a middle market company.
Yeah, an RFP is typically a process that most people associate with a bidding dynamics where whoever bids the lowest cost wins the business. There are a lot of folks in our business that will do that for a customer, come in and run an RFP to try to get the cheapest possible solution. But, the one thing I hope people leave after listening to this conversation today is, this isn't real straightforward at times, and there's a lot of different programs. There's a lot of different ways to finance these projects. It takes a fair amount of sophistication and also experience in these markets to make sure that you structure the project in a way that maximizes the potential for you, the customer. A lot of times that, in our experience, gets somewhat lost or subordinated to the mere dynamic of trying to find the person who's going to build it the cheapest for you. So one of the things we always caution is that although people do use RFPs, and that can have a good outcome, because of the complexity of this business, sometimes it makes more sense finding the right partner to help you navigate through all these different complexities, so that at the end of the day, you're getting a system that is really optimal for you, the customer's needs, and is the most cost-efficient use of your capital. So, I'd say you don't naturally want to have a knee-jerk reaction and say, gosh, I'm going to bid this out and go with a low-cost bidder, because a lot of times at the end of the day, that may not be in your best interest.
That's a really good point. It sounds like it takes up a lot of resources and might not get the best solution at the end of the day. So I'm glad that we've been able to share some tips for finding a good partner. And I should remind everyone that you can also find all of this in the white paper available as part of this webinar, where we go into detail on all these factors and identifying the right solar partner. As we're coming up on time, I'll just have one more question for each of you. I guess, Ron, you first. What's the takeaway? What should, as Kirk was mentioning, what should middle market companies be thinking about when they're addressing their energy needs, and whether solar is a good solution for them?
They should be looking at the benefits. And if the benefits line up for their goals as a company, they should absolutely move forward and investigate whether or not it makes sense for them, both on an economic level as well as an ESG level as well. Putting solar on can actually satisfy the ESG requirements of a company's vendors as really low-hanging fruit. It's really not a difficult decision in most parts of states that are good quality solar states, and there are many of them. So companies should not be afraid to look at it. They should look at the ownership issue, square on and make a decision. And then once made, they should find a partner that they really trust to put that project together for them.
Makes sense. And Kirk, one more question for you. And since I'm the marketing guy, I was hoping maybe you could give me an elevator pitch, so to speak, for a middle market company looking to go solar.
Yeah, I've been trying to make a point that this is somewhat complex in certain cases, but really it's not. It's really straightforward. It's rather simple. What we want to do is we want to try to reduce your electricity bills. We want to improve your reputation by having you use green energy. And we're going to do this by using your roof, your parking lot, perhaps a parking garage roof, or even vacant land to develop a solar array for your benefit. Now, here's the best part, Darius. With the incentive programs that we've been talking about, with some of the more sophisticated financing schemes that are available to people who are developing green energy, a lot of times we can craft a solution that really, for you, the customer, is not a major capital investment. In fact, sometimes depending upon the dynamics and what state you're in, we can develop a system for you which has absolutely no out-of-pocket costs to you, the customer. So, you get all of these great benefits, and it can be a heck of an investment. So please think of us when you're considering green energy, because I think we can help you navigate these various programs and schemes that are available.
Excellent. Thanks, Kirk, and thanks, Ron, for your time today. These were very enlightening answers that you provided, and hopefully it's helped our viewers to understand solar a little bit better. For any additional questions, check out our white paper. You can download it on this page, as I've mentioned, and get in touch at safarienergy.com. Drop us a note and we'll respond as soon as possible. Thanks again for joining this webcast, and we hope to hear from you soon.